Healthy Future Task Force opposition to CMS's non-coverage decision for the entire class of new Alzheimer's treatments, not just one drug, but the entire class of monoclonal antibody therapies that target Alzheimer's. The impact of this decision is going to be particularly harsh on people of color, people who live in rural communities, people with Down syndrome, and the poorest of the poor, full benefit, dually eligible beneficiaries. CMS is not a science agency like the FDA. They are a payer. CMS should not be allowed to contradict FDA's statutory authority to ensure the safety and efficacy of medical products in support of its public health mission. CMS claims their decision is just about Alzheimer's, but that's simply not true. This sets a precedent to further undermine the FDA's authority. The FDA launched its accelerated approval program 30 years ago. The accelerated approval program allows for expedited approval of drugs for disease states where patients and physicians have run out of or lack entirely options to treat fatal illnesses. Doug Holtz-Eakin, former director of the CBO, found that, quote, limiting coverage for accelerated approval drugs would have a devastating impact on patients benefiting from these treatments while having a de minimis impact on spending. In short, you won't get a lot of juice for the squeeze here. Congress needs to preserve and strengthen the FDA's accelerated approval program. We also support the work being done to ban public and private payers from using the quality-adjusted life year. Why is a health economics measure a problem? Because it places a lower value on those who have less years to live in front of them and on those in less than perfect health. Why should payers be allowed to determine you're not worth covering because you're too old, too sick, have a disability, or won't likely live as long due to other negative social factors in your environment? Isn't the point of paying into insurance our whole lives that it should cover treatment for you when you need it? The National Council on Disability has repeatedly warned against the use of QALYs in healthcare decision-making because it undermines major U.S. civil disability and civil rights laws, including the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Unfortunately, there are payers, including private insurers, the Veterans Administration, and state Medicaid agencies that are increasingly utilizing QALY-based cost-effectiveness analyses from the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, also known as ICER, to ration access for FDA-approved treatments. And it's time for these harmful practices to stop and for us to place patients first. It's time to ban the use of QALYs in healthcare decision-making, and I appreciate that you're trying to do that, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sue. Appreciate that. Next, it's my honor to introduce my friend, former Representative Eric Paulson, who served with me on Ways and Means Committee, one of the more thoughtful members on the Ways and Means Committee. And today he's here speaking in his new capacity as the chairman of the Institute for Gene Therapy. The Institute for Gene Therapy brings together experts across the healthcare system to advocate for a modernized policy framework that encourages transformative innovations, promotes patient access, and codifies transparent reimbursement practices. Representative Paulson, it's good to see you back, and I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you very much, and thank you, members, for inviting me to join you with Sue today. I look forward to this important discussion. As you mentioned, I'm Eric Paulson. I served in Congress from 2009 to 2019 in the 3rd District of Minnesota, but today I am honored now to serve as the chair of the Institute for Gene Therapies. And as you mentioned, as IGT as it's referenced, we launched in February of 2020, and we advocate for modernized policies to help patients access transformative gene therapies. Gene therapies are no doubt changing the way that we treat diseases. They target the cause of the disease directly at the DNA level, rather than mitigating the symptoms to create a long-lasting change in the body. The first approved gene therapies are already changing the way conditions such as MSA and inherited blindness are treated. There are many more in development, giving rare disease patients hope where before they had none. These treatments will not only help patients thrive, but gene therapies will also help deliver value to our healthcare system. As they can often be one-time treatments with benefits that last a lifetime, gene therapies help eliminate many years of expensive ongoing care. Chronic disease, as some of our physicians know, affects 50% of our population, and its care consumes 85% of our healthcare costs. So as we work to identify meaningful healthcare cost policy solutions, we should consider how gene therapies will help lower costs over time. And because gene therapies are fundamentally different from existing treatment options, there are many new challenges in bringing these therapies to patients. For example, given the very unique nature of genetic diseases and the significant unmet need, the FDA's accelerated approval pathway can be critical to ensuring that we have timely access for patients once that these treatments have been proven to be safe and effective. It's so important to protect and enhance the accelerated approval pathway. We must also ensure that we have the right tools for identifying these genetic disorders early. Timely access to an accurate diagnosis through newborn screening is important. And because of the unique nature of gene therapies, novel reimbursement pathways must be considered to help ensure that our healthcare system can accommodate these new innovative treatments. Last year, CMS took an important step forward. It issued further guidance to establish and implement the infrastructure needed for novel payment mechanisms, which are often referred to as value-based purchasing or VBP arrangements. VBPs will ensure reimbursement is based on the value that these treatments deliver to patients, and then our healthcare system can benefit over time. Earlier this month, Representative Schrader, Guthrie, and Mullen introduced the Medicaid VBPs for Patient Act, or the MVP Act, which builds on the work of CMS to make sure that there are very clear pathways for VBP arrangements. So again, I just want to thank the task force and your members for having me here today. The plan I think you have put forward addresses important issues that will make a difference in the lives of patients, ranging from VBPs to accelerating treatments to ensuring early diagnosis of cancer through new innovative tools like blood tests.
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate that. Finally, I'd like to introduce Crystal Davis to share her story. She is with us, coming to us from Texas, actually, where she founded the Texas Rare Alliance. Ms. Davis's son is a rare disease patient living with spinal muscular atrophy. Ms. Davis is an author, coach, and a patient advocate. And Ms. Davis, I'll turn to you to tell us more about your family, your work as a patient advocate, and what policies we're unveiling today might mean for you.
Thank you.
you knocked it out of the park, I have to say. And as Mr. Guthrie here just said, there's nothing like a mom and the love of a mom to go to work and advocate and try and bring out the best that we have to offer and to do it smartly. And I really appreciate your conversation about HR 3, because it would totally stymie innovation in new medications. And if anything, and we want the United States to be the hub of innovation, right? We want this to be the place. And that is something that if there's any innovation left at all, it's probably not going to be in the United States, because it would just be so crushing. So really keep advocating. We appreciate it. So we're going to take some time right now and ask some questions and go around the horn here a little bit. And I'll start with Representative Paulson. We are on the forefront of incredible medical innovation. I mean, throughout my career and practice, you know, I saw things that I had to treat surgically. A good example is patients with rheumatoid arthritis have to do reconstructive surgery. They need it on their hands, their feet, and those procedures basically went away. It went away with the biologics. The joints weren't being destroyed, and I know Dr. Joyce knows that very well in his practice as well. And I used to lecture on the procedures that I do, and I tell you. That lecture's so old now, I realized, seeing it in the basement, that it's in a carousel. So you have some idea how the innovations just keep coming. So, Mr. Paulson, if you would, can you tell us more about how these value-based arrangements would work, what the barriers are, and how reforms can help patient access to these cures of the future?
Well, first I should mention you are exactly right about innovation. These are really exciting times, and our laws and our healthcare system have to be designed to keep up with the science, is the bottom line. So with gene therapies, as you mentioned, you know, patients can get the results long-term from just one treatment potentially. And so the value that gene therapies can deliver to patients is really incredible, but more importantly, we should also be looking at how it can deliver significant value for the healthcare system as a whole by saving healthcare dollars. And since we'd be saving significant time and money with one-time treatments, rather than extending treatments for chronic care over a long period of time, we have to start thinking differently about the payment models, right? And how payments would actually occur for these transformative therapies. So I think the really great value, or the thing to talk about with value-based purchasing agreements, or VBPs, is that they can look very differently, or they can be designed very flexibly, so there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So here's an example. You could have a VBP arrangement that could involve meeting certain clinical outcomes, say after 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years for treatment. But if you failed to achieve certain outcomes, you could then require the manufacturer to give refunds back to the payer, for instance. Or maybe a VBP arrangement could provide for installment payments over a period of time so the payer can help spread the cost out for those treatments over multiple years. I think in the end, VBPs can and they will evolve over time. And if given flexibility now as policy leaders, as you develop these innovative agreements between manufacturers and payers, perhaps between regions and in different states, for instance, or large employers pooling their resources and data together, it can help ensure how we pay for innovative treatments will allow for continued innovation in the future in the treatment themselves.
Yeah, that goes to a point that we talk about here a lot, which would be like dynamic scoring of things. You know, good example is a cure for hepatitis C, which we never had until a few years ago. And people say, well, that's pretty costly. Yeah, there's some cost to it, no doubt about it. But what you're saving on the other end is tremendous. You cure this disease that otherwise requires multiple hospitalizations, a lot of palliative care, maybe a transplant, all of these things that cost way more than the cost of the drug. And we have to be thinking about that as we go to, especially towards cures. So these innovations need to be brought out there because there really is a savings. And so here, maybe we shouldn't be looking necessarily at a 10-year window of savings, but a 20-year window of savings, and it's even greater. Dr. Joyce.
Representative Paulson, I think that the innovation that gene therapies bring to the table, whether those studies are extended to other, and I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you would kindly, let's talk about diseases that have incredible financial impact, and yet gene therapies, insulin-dependent diabetics, which there have been loci found on genes, autism, which has recently been identified to have different genetic. So we look, and to my colleague, Dr. Wenstrup's point, we look at short term, but long-term costs have to be addressed. And if we stifle that innovation with HR3, which, and I really have to comment, Ms. Davis, your story, the passion that you told us about, if we stifle that, if we don't allow access and innovation to be concurrent, then we're not going to allow these cures to occur. But can you talk about future and talk about where gene therapies, we know it can be achieved, we understand that there's cost and how we value that cost. But can you look into the horizon for us and tell us what's out there?
Well, there's no doubt this is the new frontier of medicine, and I think Crystal has talked a little bit about the experience with her son, for instance. But if you think of some larger disease populations that I think are coming on the horizon for where the FDA is going to be reviewing in clinical trials is and will be continued, it's diseases like hemophilia or sickle cell anemia, for instance. And these are larger populations, so there's an opportunity for incredible healthcare dollar savings from treatment, avoiding all these chronic treatments year after year after year, with potentially long-time cures or permanent cures, right, potentially, with the FDA going through that gold standard process, keeping the accelerated approval process in place, for instance. So those are a couple of the disease states, and there's many, many more patients of rare diseases, obviously, that would have no hope were it not for this new frontier of medicine targeting individual diseases, where there's now platforms being developed to make sure that's delivered.
Thank you.
If I can ask you, Sue, when we see these bills that Democrats are coming forward with that really stymie innovation, which make it so incredibly difficult, they may sound good. They might have a nice little title to their bill, but it ends up really having deleterious effects. Can you talk about some of those things and the effects and those policies that they have out there, and what that would mean for seniors?
Sure. I mean, Crystal touched on some of this, but we share her sentiment around any types of policies like international reference pricing that would basically, adopt prices from other countries. I think that it's sort of like almost like a shiny object when we look at European countries and healthcare in European countries, like everyone is covered and it's so great. But the times that people have to wait to get access to healthcare, the access for new types of therapies, tends to be months to years longer than here in the United States. I was just thinking as Eric Paulson was speaking about how in the United States, you have wings of hospitals named after dignitaries from other countries, right? People come to the United States because we offer access and we offer innovative therapies. They don't go to European countries because they can't get it there. And aside from that, just like what Crystal said, we would be importing use of quality-based cost effectiveness. And we don't have, we have a very different healthcare system than other countries in Europe do. And we don't have to worry about sort of rationing of healthcare. And that's what QALYs do, is they set up a policy where you're rationing and you're sort of picking and choosing. So who are you leaving out? You're leaving out the sickest, the people with disabilities, the old. And that's what happens in other countries. It's more talking about, convalescent care and all of that, rather than what do the patients actually want, what do families want. And to Crystal's point, people are just devalued in those types of settings. So international reference pricing, not a good idea here in the United States.
Would you put an exclamation point, Sue, because I think you made an excellent point when you talked about CMS pushing aside the monoclonal antibodies that address the amyloid deposition, which has been identified as one of the precursors in Alzheimer's disease. So I'll speak to my district. I am in South Central Pennsylvania, from Gettysburg to the Flight 93 Memorial. It is a rural district, and yet my constituents are going to be excluded because they have to enter into phase 3, they have to enter into trials, they have to enter into studies to be included in that. Well, if you are eligible, if you can afford, if you can get into that program, but then travel 2 hours, 3 hours to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, that's going to exclude. And I'll talk about a specific patient that I'm aware of as a constituent. There's someone who has Down syndrome, which we know is a predisposition to develop Alzheimer's disease. Those are excluded. So CMS is excluding a wide population by this action. Can you address that? Because I think you touched on it briefly, and it's important because as we talk about innovation and how important that is, CMS is stifling the access.
Okay, and I have to mention that I grew up in Pittsburgh, so. But so we have to talk afterwards. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we led an Alzheimer's disease policy task force effort around this, where we had 20 organizations that were a part of it, a number of Alzheimer's patient and family caregiver groups, as well as minority health groups. And we also connected very closely with the Down syndrome community. All of the national Down syndrome organizations were opposed to CMS's coverage decision because of the reasons that you brought up, is that they would have been left out. And it's, very disturbing that these types of coverage with evidence development, even though evidence development is in the name, it's not really about collecting evidence, it's about restricting, access so that the idea is lower costs in Medicare, but it's cherry picking. Why is it Alzheimer's, and it's not fair to that community. So you have this setup where they set these coverage requirements where you have to have a multidisciplinary team and all these other things around it, where they can only occur in large, big city academic hospitals. And so rural populations are left out. A lot of minority communities are left out. They're very complicated, and they even, they try to make it sound like, oh, we're just collecting information for a patient registry. These create whole new sort of systems of business for the groups that run these registries, and they take long periods of time for patients. So if you have a full-time job and you can't afford to spend all that time, and it's just very bureaucratic. It creates a lot of money for a lot of other groups, and patients are the ones that are sort of left out of the whole equation.
That the CMS is discriminatory in this case?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they did make a point to actually bring out the equity issue, which we praised them for. But at the same time, when they sort of set up this dynamic with the draft decision and then the final decision, and Alzheimer's disease has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. It's about 2 times higher in African Americans and 1.5 times in Latinx communities. So, doing this in these types of communities, and there's a lot of people of color out in rural communities as well, it just is leaving them out of the equation. And we had National Minority Equality Forum with us, BOM and Gilead. There were a number of minority groups that partnered with us, and patients from those groups that were just, really hurt by this decision.
Thank you. You mentioned rural areas, rural and underserved areas, urban areas are a big focus of the overall Healthy Futures Task Force. Appreciate you bringing that up. Supply chain, big part of it. We would like to take some questions from the press that we have here, if we can tee that up.
I got one. And Peter with the Health Newspaper, thanks for doing this. This is for Mr. Guthrie. I think this is for the whole future, not just this subcommittee. But on Obamacare, are you going to say, are you going to call for repealing and replacing Obamacare, or how do you kind of address that in this task force?
Well, what we're trying to focus on, of course, leadership is going to, in the end, as we work this together, but what we're focused on, if you're talking about, we want solutions. We want things that are going to work. We're talking about HR 19, which is bipartisan bills. We're talking about fixing the issue with Agilum, where they have CMS. I've had Democrat colleagues talk about that needs to be fixed. We're talking about value-based agreements. You just saw that Kurt Schrader and I, along with Mark Wayne Mullen, are on the bill. And so what we really want to focus on, we know over the next 2 years, Joe Biden is going to be president of the United States. And so if we want to get things done that are going to make a difference in people's lives, then we have to do things that fit our principles, fit our marketplace, that we can get, which HR 19 does, that we can get Democrat support so we can get it through the Senate and signed by the president. So we want successes. for the American people. And we're going to only be able to do that if we can stay within our values, but work with colleagues that share our values on the other side of the aisle and get these things to the president. That's going to be our focus.
I was going to talk about priorities, but just laid that out very nicely. Maybe we'll start with the list on that way. In terms of the at-home decision, I mean, would that be a legislative fix that we would be looking at, or how would you sort of address that?
We're looking at the right way to do that. We talked about it with several people. Brought it to Secretary Becerra yesterday when he spoke to Energy and Commerce. I assume it came up in Ways and Means today. And so we want to work to see where we need to go with that. It is so there's not a current legislative draft that I know of that I'm working. Well, I know that I'm not working. I don't know if someone else is working on to move forward. But we're concerned about the precedent of FDA being the scientific body, as I don't know if it was Ms. Peshin or Dr. Winstrup said, FDA being the scientific body and CMS being the payer, and then CMS making decisions based on FDA approval, that they're substituting their view for that. So we got to figure out, I don't think they have the authority to do that anyway. And so what we want to try to sort through, if we can work through it, if not, I think there needs to be a legislative fix. But I don't know of a current legislative fix, and we want to try to address it the way they are, and we don't think CMS has that authority anyway.
Sure. And the FDA approval of that raised a bunch of questions about the accelerated approval process, which y'all talked a lot about here today. There's also been, at hearings, a lot of talk about, potentially tweaking accelerated approval. And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about, you talked about strengthening that process and sort of how you see addressing accelerated approval.
Well, if I may,
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
You take the example we just talked about with FDA and CDC. There has to be greater communication between. But you have these bodies, and they're in silos, but they need to be talking, through this process. And I think that was terribly missed in the decision we just saw there. So openness, transparency, communication across the board. You're accelerating, but you're explaining why. I look at things like Operation Warp Speed, right? So we were very much engaged, especially as medical professionals in conference and in Congress on what was going on. We could look at the trials. We were understanding what was taking place, what the technology was doing. This has to be interactive like that, and what our thought process is, and why FDA approved this drug, and et cetera. But say for the vaccine, as we're looking at that, we were out saying, oh, I understand what you're doing. In most trials for a new drug by FDA, there's usually 8,000 to 10,000 people in a trial. These trials had 40,000 to 50,000 people in them. That was an important thing for the American people to know, and for everyone to know as you're going through this process. So a little more openness and communication amongst the agencies would make a big difference, I think. Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank our guests, and I want to thank the press for being here as well, to listen in on what we have to say. I have to say, Ms. Davis, you did such an outstanding job of summarizing anything. We didn't have any questions of you because you answered them.
Yeah, you did.
So the things that I had down that I was maybe going to ask you, you already summed up. But everyone did a great job, I think, and thank you for your advocacy for all the right reasons on behalf of patients. And thanks for everyone who's joined us today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.